Welcome to World Revolution. Here are 10 key lessons from the Analysis of Mind by Bertrand Russell. The Analysis of Mind by Bertrand Russell is a philosophical examination of the nature of mental phenomena and their relationship to consciousness. Russell explores various psychological theories, including behaviorism and psychoanalysis, to provide a comprehensive understanding of mental processes. He argues against the traditional notion that consciousness is a fundamental element of mental experiences, suggesting instead that both mind and matter may stem from a more primitive substance. Example 1. Behaviorism and mental phenomena. Scenario: Russell discusses the behaviorist approach to understanding mental phenomena. Narrative: Russell examines behaviorism, which focuses on observable behavior as the primary subject of psychological study. He explains that behaviorists argue that mental states can be understood in terms of behavioral responses to stimuli. By analyzing how individuals react to different situations, behaviorists aim to uncover the underlying mental processes. Russell highlights the strengths and limitations of this approach, emphasizing the importance of considering both observable behavior and internal mental states. Example 2. Psychoanalysis and unconscious desires. Scenario: Russell explores the psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud. Narrative: Russell delves into Freud's theory of the unconscious mind, which posits that many of our thoughts and behaviors are driven by unconscious desires and conflicts. He discusses how psychoanalysis seeks to uncover these hidden desires through techniques like free association and dream analysis. Russell evaluates the contributions and challenges of psychoanalysis, noting its impact on our understanding of the mind and its limitations in explaining all mental phenomena. Example 3. Neutral monism and the mind-body problem. Scenario: Russell introduces the concept of neutral monism. Narrative: Russell presents the idea of neutral monism, which suggests that both mind and matter are composed of a more fundamental substance that underlies both. He argues that this approach offers a potential solution to the mind-body problem, which has puzzled philosophers for centuries. By proposing that mental and physical phenomena are manifestations of the same underlying reality, Russell aims to reconcile the materialism of psychology with the anti-materialism of physics. Example 4. Causal theory of meaning. Scenario: Russell develops his own causal theory of meaning. Narrative: Russell introduces his causal theory of meaning, which posits that the meaning of a word is determined by its causal relationship with the objects or events it refers to. He explains that understanding the meaning of a term involves examining how it is used in different contexts and its connections to the world. Russell's theory provides a new framework for analyzing language and its role in shaping our understanding of mental phenomena. Example 5. Critique of traditional notions of consciousness. Scenario: Russell challenges traditional views on consciousness. Narrative: Russell critiques the commonly held belief that consciousness is an essential characteristic of mental phenomena. He argues that consciousness may not be a fundamental aspect of the mind but rather a byproduct of more basic mental processes. By questioning the centrality of consciousness, Russell opens up new avenues for exploring the nature of mental experiences and their relationship to the physical world. These examples from the Analysis of Mind illustrate Russell's innovative approach to understanding the mind and his efforts to reconcile psychological and physical theories. By examining various perspectives and proposing new ideas, Russell contributes to a deeper and more comprehensive understanding of mental phenomena. Here are 10 key lessons from this profound work. 1. The mind and body are interconnected. Russell emphasizes that the mind cannot be separated from the body. He challenges the Cartesian notion of dualism and explores how mental phenomena are deeply rooted in physical processes. Thoughts, emotions, and consciousness are the result of interactions between the brain and the nervous system. Example 1. The theory of neutral monism. Scenario: Russell introduces the concept of neutral monism to explain the connection between the mind and body. Narrative: Neutral monism posits that both mental and physical phenomena originate from a more fundamental substance. Russell argues that mind and matter are not distinct entities but different manifestations of the same underlying reality. This perspective challenges traditional dualist views, suggesting that mental states, such as thoughts and emotions, and physical states, such as neural activity, are interconnected. For instance, the experience of pain involves both the mental perception of discomfort and the physical activation of pain receptors in the body. By recognizing this interconnection, Russell offers a more integrated understanding of human experiences. Example 2, the role of sensation. Scenario: Russell examines the role of sensations in bridging the mind-body gap. Narrative: sensations, according to Russell, are primary elements that link mental and physical realms. He explains that sensations like sight, sound, and touch arise from interactions between external stimuli and our sensory organs. These sensations are then processed by the brain, leading to conscious experiences. For example, when you see a red apple, the light reflecting off the apple enters your eyes, activates photoreceptor cells in your retina, and sends signals to your brain. This physical process results in the mental experience of seeing a red apple. Russell's analysis shows how sensations serve as a bridge between the mind and the body, demonstrating their interconnected nature. Example 3, the influence of emotions on physical states. Scenario: Russell explores how emotions impact physical states and vice versa. Narrative: emotions, as Russell explains, have both mental and physical components. When you feel anxious, you might experience racing thoughts and worry, mental state, along with increased heart rate and muscle tension, physical state. Conversely, physical conditions can influence emotions. For instance, physical exhaustion can lead to feelings of irritability or sadness. Russell's analysis highlights the bidirectional relationship between emotions and physical states, emphasizing that our mental and bodily experiences are intertwined and mutually influential. Example 4, the connection between mental states and behavior. Scenario: Russell examines how mental states influence behavior and physical actions. Narrative: according to Russell, our mental states, such as beliefs, desires, and intentions, directly influence our physical behaviors. When you decide to pick up a book, your mental intention translates into a series of physical actions involving muscle movements and coordination. Similarly, physical behaviors can affect mental states. Engaging in regular physical exercise can improve mood and cognitive function. This interplay between mental intentions and physical actions underscores the interconnectedness of the mind and body, showing how they work together to produce coherent and purposeful behavior. Example 5, the role of perception in shaping reality. Scenario: Russell discusses how perception shapes our understanding of reality. Narrative: perception, as Russell explains, is a complex process involving both mental interpretation and physical sensations. When you perceive an object, your sensory organs gather information, which is then interpreted by your brain to form a coherent mental representation. For example, perceiving a tree involves not only the physical sensation of seeing its shape and color but also the mental process of recognizing and categorizing it as a tree. This dual involvement of mind and body in perception illustrates their interconnectedness and how they shape our understanding of the world. 2. Perception is not reality. Russell points out that what we perceive is not an exact copy of reality. Our perceptions are filtered through subjective experiences, influenced by sensory input and cognitive processes. Therefore, perception is a mental construction rather than a direct representation of the external world. Perception is not reality is explored in depth. Russell argues that our perceptions are often subjective interpretations of reality rather than objective truths. Here are some detailed examples explained in a narrative format. Example 1, the fallibility of sensory perception. Scenario: Russell discusses the limitations and errors of sensory perception. Narrative: Russell explains that our sensory perceptions can often deceive us. For example, when you place a straight stick halfway into water, it appears bent due to the refraction of light. While your eyes perceive the stick as bent, reality confirms it remains straight. This optical illusion demonstrates that our sensory perceptions can distort reality, leading us to false conclusions. Russell uses this example to illustrate that what we perceive is not always a direct reflection of the actual world but rather an interpretation shaped by our senses and cognitive processes. Example 2. The influence of past experiences. Scenario: Russell examines how past experiences shape our perceptions. Narrative: imagine two people looking at a cloud, one sees a fluffy sheep while the other sees a dragon. Russell would argue that these differing perceptions are influenced by each person's past experiences and mental associations. The person who sees a sheep may have a background in farming or a childhood filled with stories about animals, while the other may have an interest in mythology or fantasy. This example shows how our individual experiences and memories shape the way we perceive the world, reinforcing the idea that perception is subjective and not an absolute reflection of reality. Example 3. The role of expectation and belief. Scenario: Russell explores how expectations and beliefs influence perception. Narrative: consider a scenario where a person enters a room expecting to meet an old friend. Even if the room is filled with strangers, they might momentarily mistake someone with a similar appearance for their friend. This mistake occurs because their expectation influences their perception, leading them to see what they hope or expect to see. Russell uses such examples to illustrate how our beliefs and expectations can color our perceptions, further distancing them from objective reality. Example 4. The subjectivity of pain. Scenario: Russell discusses the subjective nature of pain and its perception. Narrative: Russell argues that pain is a deeply subjective experience. Two people with similar injuries may report vastly different levels of pain based on their tolerance, emotional state, and previous experiences with pain. For instance, a seasoned athlete may perceive a minor sprain as a small inconvenience, while a person unaccustomed to physical activity might find the same injury highly painful. This subjectivity in the perception of pain demonstrates that individual experiences and mental states play a significant role in shaping how we perceive reality. Example 5. The ambiguity of visual perception. Scenario: Russell examines how visual perception can be ambiguous and open to interpretation. Narrative: Russell discusses how visual stimuli can lead to different interpretations. An example he might use is the famous image that can be seen as either a young woman or an old woman, depending on the viewer's perspective. This optical illusion highlights the ambiguity of visual perception and how our minds can interpret the same stimulus in multiple ways. It reinforces the idea that what we perceive is not always a straightforward representation of reality but can be influenced by our mental processes and viewpoint. These examples from the analysis of mind illustrate Bertrand Russell's exploration of the theme perception is not reality. He demonstrates that our perceptions are often subjective and shaped by various factors, challenging the notion that we perceive the world as it truly is. 3. The role of memory in shaping consciousness. Memory is central to Russell's theory of mind. He argues that much of what we consider to be consciousness depends on our ability to remember past experiences. Memory allows us to link different moments together, creating the continuity that defines our sense of self and experience. Example 1. Memory as the foundation of experience. Scenario: Russell discusses how memory forms the basis of our experiences and shapes our understanding of the world. Narrative: Russell explains that memory allows us to retain past experiences and use them to interpret present events. For example, when you see a familiar face, it is your memory that enables you to recognize the person and recall shared experiences. This recognition shapes your current interaction, influencing your thoughts and emotions. Without memory, each moment would be isolated, and our consciousness would lack continuity. Russell argues that memory provides the context needed to make sense of our experiences, making it a crucial component of consciousness. Example 2. Memory and personal identity. Scenario: Russell examines the role of memory in forming and maintaining personal identity. Narrative: imagine waking up each day with no recollection of who you are or what you have experienced. Russell posits that memory is essential for maintaining a coherent sense of self. It is through memory that we build and preserve our personal narratives. For instance, remembering your childhood, significant life events, and personal achievements helps you construct your identity. These memories form a continuous thread that defines who you are. Russell emphasizes that without memory, our sense of identity would be fragmented, highlighting its importance in shaping consciousness and self-awareness. Example 3. The influence of memory on perception. Scenario: Russell explores how memory influences our perception of the present. Narrative: memory plays a critical role in shaping how we perceive the world around us. For example, when you enter a familiar room, your memory of the room's layout and past experiences within it influences your current perception. If the room has been rearranged, your memory helps you notice the changes and adapt to the new environment. This process allows us to navigate the world efficiently, using past knowledge to inform present actions. Russell argues that memory integrates past and present experiences, enriching our perception and enhancing our conscious awareness. Example 4. The role of memory in learning and knowledge. Scenario: Russell discusses how memory underpins learning and the accumulation of knowledge. Narrative: learning is fundamentally dependent on memory. When you study a new subject, it is your memory that enables you to retain and recall information. Russell highlights that memory allows us to build upon previous knowledge, creating a foundation for further learning. For instance, mastering a complex skill, like playing a musical instrument, requires the retention of practice sessions and techniques learned over time. Memory consolidates this knowledge, enabling progressive improvement. Russell emphasizes that without memory, learning would be impossible, underscoring its vital role in shaping our conscious mind. Example 5. The interplay between memory and imagination. Scenario: Russell explores the relationship between memory and imagination in shaping consciousness. Narrative: memory and imagination are intertwined, each influencing the other. When you imagine a future scenario, you often draw upon past experiences stored in your memory. For example, planning a vacation involves recalling previous trips and imagining new experiences based on those memories. Russell argues that this interplay allows us to project ourselves into the future, plan, and innovate. Memory provides the raw material for imagination, while imagination expands upon and reinterprets these memories. This dynamic relationship enriches our consciousness, enabling creativity and forward thinking. These examples from the analysis of mind illustrate Bertrand Russell's exploration of the role of memory in shaping consciousness. He demonstrates that memory is essential for maintaining a sense of self, influencing perception, facilitating learning, and enabling imagination. 4. Emotion is tied to instinct and behavior. Russell explores the relationship between emotions and instinctive behavior, suggesting that emotions are responses to stimuli that have evolved for survival. Emotions influence our actions and decisions, and understanding their biological roots helps us comprehend why we feel and react in certain ways. Example 1. The instinctive basis of emotions. Scenario: Russell discusses the instinctive origins of emotions. Narrative: Russell argues that many of our emotions have instinctive roots, which have evolved to help us survive and respond to our environment. For example, the emotion of fear is tied to the instinct of self-preservation. When we encounter a threatening situation, our instinctive response is to feel fear, which triggers behaviors like fleeing or seeking safety. This instinctive emotional response helps protect us from harm. Russell highlights that emotions like fear, anger, and joy are closely linked to our basic instincts, shaping our behaviors in ways that enhance our chances of survival and well-being. Example 2. The role of emotions in social behavior. Scenario: Russell examines how emotions influence social interactions and behaviors. Narrative: emotions play a crucial role in guiding our social behaviors and interactions. For instance, the emotion of empathy is tied to the instinct of social bonding. When we see someone in distress, we instinctively feel empathy, which motivates us to offer help and support. This emotional response strengthens social bonds and fosters cooperation within groups. Russell explains that emotions like love, compassion, and anger are essential for navigating complex social dynamics, influencing behaviors that promote social cohesion and mutual support. Example 3. The behavioral expression of emotions. Scenario: Russell explores how emotions manifest in physical behaviors. Narrative: emotions are often expressed through specific behaviors and physical reactions. For example, the emotion of happiness is typically accompanied by smiling, laughing, and other positive expressions. These behaviors signal our emotional state to others and can influence their reactions. Conversely, emotions like anger or frustration may result in aggressive behaviors or tense body language. Russell emphasizes that the physical expression of emotions serves as a way to communicate our internal states, shaping our interactions and responses to the environment. Example 4. The interplay between emotion and reason. Scenario: Russell discusses the relationship between emotional and rational responses. Narrative: while emotions are closely tied to instincts, they also interact with our rational processes. For example, the emotion of anxiety may prompt us to evaluate potential threats and take precautionary measures. However, excessive anxiety can lead to irrational behaviors if not managed by reason. Russell argues that the interplay between emotion and reason is essential for adaptive behavior. Emotions provide quick, instinctive responses to situations, while reason allows us to evaluate and modify those responses based on context and experience. Example 5. The adaptive value of emotions. Scenario: Russell examines the adaptive functions of emotions in guiding behavior. Narrative: emotions serve adaptive purposes by guiding behaviors that enhance survival and well-being. For instance, the emotion of disgust helps protect us from harmful substances by triggering avoidance behaviors. Similarly, the emotion of attachment fosters bonds between caregivers and offspring, ensuring the care and protection of the young. Russell explains that these emotional responses have evolved because they contribute to the overall fitness and success of individuals and groups. By understanding the adaptive value of emotions, we can appreciate their role in shaping behaviors that are beneficial for survival. These examples from the analysis of mind illustrate Bertrand Russell's exploration of the interconnectedness of emotion, instinct, and behavior. He demonstrates that emotions are deeply rooted in our instincts and play a crucial role in guiding our actions and responses to various situations. 5. Language shapes thought. Language plays a crucial role in how we think and conceptualize the world. Russell emphasizes that words are not merely labels for objects or ideas but are fundamental to the structure of thought itself. Language allows for abstract thinking and reasoning, which sets humans apart from other animals. Example 1. The interdependence of language and thought. Scenario: Russell discusses the relationship between language and thought. Narrative: Russell argues that language and thought are deeply interconnected, suggesting that our ability to think is heavily influenced by the language we use. For instance, consider how we categorize and describe colors. In some languages, there are distinct words for different shades of blue, while in others, there is a single word that encompasses all shades of blue. This linguistic difference affects how speakers of each language perceive and think about colors. Russell highlights that the structure and vocabulary of our language can shape our cognitive processes, influencing how we categorize and interpret our experiences. Example 2. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Scenario: Russell examines the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which posits that language determines thought. Narrative: the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests that the language we speak influences the way we think and perceive the world. Russell uses the example of the Hopi language, which lacks specific verb tenses for past, present, and future. Instead, it describes events based on their degree of certainty or evidence. This linguistic structure shapes how Hopi speakers conceptualize time, viewing it as a continuum rather than discrete segments. Russell explores how the differences in linguistic structures between languages can lead to variations in cognitive processes, supporting the idea that language shapes thought. Example 3. The role of metaphors in shaping understanding. Scenario: Russell discusses how metaphors influence our understanding of abstract concepts. Narrative: metaphors are a powerful linguistic tool that shapes how we understand and think about abstract concepts. For example, we often use spatial metaphors to describe time, such as looking forward to the future or leaving the past behind. These metaphors frame our understanding of time in terms of physical space, influencing how we conceptualize temporal relationships. Russell emphasizes that the metaphors we use in language can shape our cognitive frameworks and the way we interpret complex ideas. By analyzing the metaphors embedded in our language, we can gain insights into how they shape our thought processes. Example 4. Language and cultural differences. Scenario: Russell explores how language reflects and shapes cultural differences. Narrative: language is not only a tool for communication but also a reflection of cultural values and practices. For example, some languages have specific words for concepts that do not have direct equivalents in other languages. The Japanese word wabi-sabi encapsulates the appreciation of imperfection and transience, a concept that is deeply rooted in Japanese culture. English speakers might struggle to fully grasp this idea without a similar linguistic term. Russell argues that language shapes our thought by reflecting and reinforcing cultural norms, influencing how we perceive and interpret the world around us. Example 5. The influence of language on memory and recall. Scenario: Russell examines how language affects memory and recall. Narrative: the language we use can influence how we remember and recall information. For example, research has shown that bilingual individuals may remember events differently depending on the language they were using at the time. If someone experienced an event while speaking Spanish, recalling the event in Spanish might bring up more vivid and detailed memories than if they tried to recall it in English. Russell uses such examples to illustrate that language plays a crucial role in shaping our memory and the way we organize and retrieve information. This connection between language and memory further demonstrates how linguistic structures influence cognitive processes. These examples from the analysis of mind illustrate Bertrand Russell's exploration of the idea that language shapes thought. He demonstrates that language influences our cognitive processes, perceptions, and understanding of the world, highlighting the profound impact of linguistic structures on our minds. 6. Consciousness is a process, not a thing. Russell challenges the idea of consciousness as a static entity. Instead, he views consciousness as a dynamic process involving continuous mental events. Consciousness is not a thing that exists independently, it is an ongoing, fluid interaction of thoughts, perceptions, and feelings. Example 1. The flow of consciousness. Scenario: Russell discusses how consciousness is a continuous process rather than a fixed state. Narrative: Russell likens consciousness to a stream, constantly flowing and changing. He argues that our conscious experience is not a series of discrete events but a continuous process that evolves over time. For instance, when reading a book, your consciousness shifts from understanding the words to visualizing the scenes, forming thoughts and emotions as you progress through the story. This fluid nature of consciousness demonstrates that it is an ongoing process shaped by the interplay of various mental activities, rather than a static thing. Example 2. The interaction of mental states. Scenario: Russell examines how different mental states interact to create conscious experience. Narrative: Russell explains that consciousness arises from the interaction of various mental states, such as perception, memory, and thought. For example, when you see a familiar face, your perception, seeing the face, interacts with your memory, recalling past interactions, to create a conscious experience of recognition. This interaction illustrates that consciousness is not a single entity but a process that emerges from the combination of different cognitive functions working together. Russell's view emphasizes the complexity and dynamic nature of conscious experience. Example 3. The role of attention in shaping consciousness. Scenario: Russell explores the role of attention in the process of consciousness. Narrative: attention plays a crucial role in shaping our conscious experience by determining which stimuli we focus on and process. Russell describes how shifting our attention can change the content of our consciousness. For example, when walking in a park, you might initially focus on the scenery, but if you hear a sudden noise, your attention shifts to identify the source of the sound. This shift in focus demonstrates that consciousness is an active process influenced by where we direct our attention, further supporting the idea that it is dynamic and constantly evolving. Example 4. Consciousness and adaptation. Scenario: Russell discusses how consciousness adapts to new information and experiences. Narrative: consciousness is adaptive, continuously integrating new information and experiences to guide our behavior. Russell explains that when we encounter novel situations, our consciousness adjusts to make sense of the unfamiliar stimuli. For instance, when learning to drive a car, your consciousness initially focuses on the mechanics of operating the vehicle. Over time, as you become more skilled, your consciousness adapts, allowing you to drive with less conscious effort and focus on navigating the road. This adaptability highlights the processual nature of consciousness, as it evolves in response to new experiences and learning. Example 5. The influence of external stimuli. Scenario: Russell examines how external stimuli shape the process of consciousness. Narrative: external stimuli play a significant role in shaping our conscious experience. Russell argues that our consciousness is constantly influenced by the environment, responding to sensory inputs and changes in our surroundings. For example, the experience of being in a noisy, crowded room differs significantly from being in a quiet, serene garden. The external stimuli in each setting influence the content and quality of your conscious experience, demonstrating that consciousness is a process shaped by ongoing interactions with the external world. These examples from the analysis of mind illustrate Bertrand Russell's exploration of the idea that consciousness is a process, not a thing. He demonstrates that consciousness is a dynamic and evolving process, emerging from the interaction of mental states, attention, adaptation, and external stimuli. 7. Behaviorism and the study of mind. In the analysis of mind, Russell engages with behaviorism, which focuses on observable behavior rather than internal mental states. He argues that while behaviorism has limitations, it offers valuable insights into understanding the mind by studying the correlation between external actions and internal mental processes. Example 1. The foundation of behaviorism. Scenario: Russell introduces the foundational principles of behaviorism. Narrative: behaviorism, as Russell explains, focuses on studying observable behaviors rather than unobservable mental states. He describes how behaviorists like John Watson argue that psychology should be a science based on observable and measurable behaviors. For instance, when studying how children learn, behaviorists would analyze the actions and reactions of children to different stimuli rather than trying to infer their internal thoughts or feelings. Russell highlights that behaviorism aims to make psychology more objective and scientific by relying on observable data. Example 2. The stimulus-response model. Scenario: Russell examines the stimulus-response model central to behaviorism. Narrative: the stimulus-response model is a core concept in behaviorism. Russell explains that behaviorists believe behavior is a response to external stimuli. For example, when a dog hears a bell and then receives food, it begins to associate the sound of the bell with food and salivates upon hearing the bell alone. This learned behavior is a classic example of the stimulus-response model. Russell uses this example to illustrate how behaviorists study the relationship between stimuli and responses to understand learning and behavior. Example 3. Critique of introspection. Scenario: Russell critiques the introspective method traditionally used in psychology. Narrative: Russell discusses how behaviorists reject introspection as a method for studying the mind. Introspection involves individuals examining their own thoughts and feelings, but behaviorists argue that this method is subjective and unreliable. For example, two people might have different introspective reports about their emotional experiences, making it difficult to achieve consistent and objective results. Russell supports the behaviorist view that psychology should rely on observable behaviors that can be measured and replicated, rather than subjective introspective reports. Example 4. Application in child development. Scenario: Russell explores how behaviorism is applied to study child development. Narrative: behaviorism has significantly influenced the study of child development. Russell describes how behaviorists study how children learn behaviors through reinforcement and punishment. For instance, a child who receives praise for completing their homework is more likely to repeat the behavior in the future. This reinforcement shapes the child's behavior over time. Russell highlights that behaviorists use controlled experiments to observe how different types of reinforcement affect learning and development, making it a practical approach to understanding behavior. Example 5. Behaviorism's limitations and contributions. Scenario: Russell discusses the limitations and contributions of behaviorism. Narrative: while Russell acknowledges the strengths of behaviorism in making psychology more scientific and objective, he also points out its limitations. Behaviorism tends to overlook the internal mental processes that influence behavior. For example, behaviorists might study the observable actions of someone with anxiety but ignore the internal thoughts and emotions contributing to the anxiety. Russell emphasizes that a comprehensive understanding of the mind requires integrating behaviorist principles with insights from other psychological theories, such as cognitive psychology, to account for both observable behaviors and internal mental states. These examples from the analysis of mind illustrate Bertrand Russell's exploration of behaviorism and the study of mind. He discusses how behaviorism focuses on observable behaviors, critiques traditional methods like introspection, and applies its principles to areas like child development while acknowledging its limitations. 8. Knowledge is built on sensory experience. Russell asserts that all knowledge begins with sensory experience. Our understanding of the world is constructed from the data we receive through our senses, but this knowledge is not infallible. We constantly interpret, reinterpret, and organize sensory information, meaning our knowledge is always evolving. Example 1. The empiricist perspective. Scenario: Russell discusses the empiricist view that sensory experience is the foundation of knowledge. Narrative: Russell aligns with the empiricist perspective, which posits that all knowledge originates from sensory experience. For example, consider how we learn about the properties of water. Through sensory experiences, such as seeing water's transparency, feeling its wetness, and hearing its flow, we gather information about water. These sensory inputs form the foundation of our knowledge about this substance. Russell argues that without such sensory experiences, our understanding of the world would be significantly limited, highlighting that sensory input is crucial for building knowledge. Example 2. The role of perception in learning. Scenario: Russell explores how perception shapes our learning process. Narrative: perception plays a critical role in how we learn and acquire knowledge. Imagine a child learning about the world around them. By touching different objects, the child perceives varying textures, temperatures, and shapes. These sensory experiences help the child distinguish between objects like a smooth glass and a rough rock. Russell emphasizes that perception, which relies on sensory inputs, is essential for the learning process. Our brains process these sensory experiences to form concepts and understand the environment, illustrating that knowledge is deeply rooted in sensory perception. Example 3. The construction of abstract concepts. Scenario: Russell examines how abstract concepts are built from sensory experiences. Narrative: abstract concepts, even those that seem distant from direct sensory experience, are constructed from sensory inputs. For instance, the concept of time is understood through sensory experiences like the movement of the sun, the ticking of a clock, or the changing seasons. These sensory experiences allow us to abstract the idea of time, creating a concept that helps us organize our understanding of events. Russell argues that even complex, abstract ideas ultimately trace their origins back to sensory experiences, reinforcing that knowledge is built on sensory foundations. Example 4. The interplay between sensation and memory. Scenario: Russell discusses the relationship between sensation and memory in knowledge formation. Narrative: sensory experiences not only provide immediate knowledge but also form the basis for memory, which further shapes our understanding. For example, tasting a particular dish creates a sensory memory of its flavor. Later, this memory can influence future experiences, such as recognizing the dish at a restaurant or recalling it while cooking. Russell highlights that memory relies on past sensory experiences to inform our present and future knowledge, demonstrating that the interplay between sensation and memory is fundamental to building a coherent understanding of the world. Example 5. The limitations of sensory experience. Scenario: Russell acknowledges the limitations of sensory experience in forming knowledge. Narrative: while sensory experiences are crucial for building knowledge, Russell also acknowledges their limitations. Sensory inputs can be deceiving or incomplete. For example, a stick partially submerged in water appears bent due to the refraction of light, even though it remains straight. Such optical illusions reveal that sensory experiences can sometimes mislead us. Russell argues that to overcome these limitations, we must critically analyze and verify sensory data through scientific methods and logical reasoning. This approach ensures that our knowledge, although rooted in sensory experience, is accurate and reliable. These examples from the analysis of mind illustrate Bertrand Russell's exploration of the idea that knowledge is built on sensory experience. He demonstrates that sensory inputs are foundational to our understanding of the world, shaping our perceptions, memories, and abstract concepts, while also highlighting the importance of critical analysis in refining our knowledge. 9. The illusion of free will. Russell questions the concept of free will, proposing that our choices are influenced by previous experiences, external stimuli, and psychological conditioning. Although we may feel as though we are making independent decisions, much of our behavior is determined by factors outside of our conscious control. Example 1. Deterministic influences on behavior. Scenario: Russell discusses how external factors determine behavior. Narrative: Russell argues that human behavior is largely determined by external influences, such as environmental factors and social conditioning. For instance, consider a person deciding what to eat for dinner. While they may feel they are exercising free will in choosing a meal, their choice is influenced by factors like cultural preferences, past experiences, and availability of ingredients. These deterministic factors shape the person's decision, suggesting that their perceived free will is an illusion. Russell uses this example to illustrate how our actions are often the result of predetermined conditions rather than independent choices. Example 2. The role of unconscious processes. Scenario: Russell examines the impact of unconscious processes on decision-making. Narrative: Many decisions we believe to be made consciously are actually influenced by unconscious processes. For example, when faced with a sudden threat, we might instinctively choose to flee. This fight or flight response is an automatic reaction governed by our brain's survival mechanisms. Even in more mundane situations, unconscious biases and heuristics often guide our choices. Russell explains that these unconscious influences play a significant role in shaping our behavior, further challenging the notion of absolute free will. Example 3. Psychological conditioning. Scenario: Russell explores how psychological conditioning affects the perception of free will. Narrative: Psychological conditioning, as demonstrated by behaviorist experiments, shows how behavior can be shaped by rewards and punishments. For instance, consider Pavlov's experiments with dogs, where the animals were conditioned to salivate at the sound of a bell associated with feeding. Similarly, human behaviors can be conditioned by external reinforcements. A student might choose to study hard because they have been conditioned to associate academic success with positive outcomes like praise and rewards. Russell argues that such conditioning challenges the idea of free will, as our behaviors are often responses to conditioned stimuli. Example 4. The influence of social and cultural norms. Scenario: Russell examines how social and cultural norms influence decision-making. Narrative: Social and cultural norms play a significant role in shaping our choices and behaviors. For example, an individual's decision to pursue a particular career may be influenced by societal expectations, family pressures, and cultural values. A person growing up in a culture that highly values medical professionals might feel compelled to become a doctor, even if their personal interests lie elsewhere. Russell argues that these social and cultural influences constrain our choices, creating the illusion of free will when, in reality, our decisions are shaped by external factors. Example 5. The interplay of genetics and environment. Scenario: Russell explores how genetics and environment interact to influence behavior. Narrative: Russell discusses the interplay between genetics and environmental factors in shaping behavior. For instance, consider the case of identical twins raised in different environments. While their genetic makeup is identical, their behaviors and choices can vary significantly due to the influence of their unique environments. One twin might develop a talent for music due to exposure and encouragement in their environment, while the other might excel in sports for similar reasons. This example illustrates how both genetic predispositions and environmental factors contribute to shaping behavior, challenging the notion of free will as independent of these influences. These examples from the analysis of mind illustrate Bertrand Russell's exploration of the illusion of free will. He demonstrates that human behavior is influenced by deterministic factors, unconscious processes, conditioning, social norms, and the interplay of genetics and environment, suggesting that our sense of free will is often an illusion. 10. Mind as a collection of events. Rather than thinking of the mind as a singular entity, Russell suggests that it is better understood as a series of events or occurrences. These events include perceptions, emotions, thoughts, and memories. The mind is not a substance but a series of interconnected occurrences that create the experience of being conscious. Example 1. The episodic nature of consciousness. Scenario: Russell discusses how consciousness is composed of a series of events. Narrative: Russell explains that consciousness is not a continuous state but a sequence of discrete events. Imagine the experience of listening to music. Each note you hear, each emotion you feel, and each memory that the music evokes are individual events that contribute to your overall experience. These events are interconnected but distinct, highlighting the episodic nature of consciousness. Russell argues that understanding the mind as a collection of such events provides a more accurate picture of how we experience the world. Example 2. Mental states as processes. Scenario: Russell examines how mental states are dynamic processes rather than static entities. Narrative: Consider the mental state of feeling joy. According to Russell, this feeling is not a static thing but a process that unfolds over time. The joy you feel when receiving good news involves a series of events: reading or hearing the news, processing the information, recalling related memories, and experiencing a surge of positive emotions. Each of these events contributes to the overall mental state of joy. Russell's perspective emphasizes that mental states are dynamic and evolving processes, shaped by a sequence of events. Example 3. The interconnectedness of perception and memory. Scenario: Russell explores how perception and memory are interrelated events that shape the mind. Narrative: When you perceive an object, such as a red apple, your perception involves sensory inputs, seeing the apple, and the retrieval of related memories, recalling the taste of apples. These events interact to create a unified experience. For example, seeing the red apple may trigger memories of past experiences with apples, influencing your current perception and emotional response. Russell argues that the mind is a collection of such interconnected events, where perception and memory work together to shape conscious experience. Example 4. The role of attention in mental events. Scenario: Russell discusses how attention plays a crucial role in organizing mental events. Narrative: Attention is a key factor in determining which events become part of our conscious experience. For instance, when walking through a busy street, your attention shifts between various stimuli: sounds of traffic, sights of people, and smells of food. Each shift in attention brings a new set of events into your consciousness. By selectively focusing on certain stimuli, attention helps organize and structure the events that make up the mind. Russell highlights that the mind is not a fixed entity but a dynamic collection of events influenced by where we direct our attention. Example 5. The fluid nature of identity. Scenario: Russell examines how personal identity is shaped by a collection of events. Narrative: Russell argues that personal identity is not a fixed essence but a fluid construct shaped by ongoing events and experiences. For example, your identity is influenced by the events of your life, childhood memories, educational experiences, relationships, and personal achievements. Each of these events contributes to your sense of self, which evolves over time. Russell's view suggests that understanding the mind as a collection of events allows for a more nuanced understanding of personal identity, recognizing that it is constantly being reshaped by new experiences. Learning from this topic. Narrative: Learning that the mind is a collection of events rather than a static entity has profound implications for understanding human behavior and cognition. It emphasizes the importance of considering the dynamic and interconnected nature of mental processes. This perspective encourages us to appreciate the fluidity of consciousness and the role of various events in shaping our experiences and identity. It also highlights the significance of individual moments and their contributions to the larger tapestry of the mind. By recognizing the mind as a collection of events, we can better understand the complexity of human experiences, the interplay of perception, memory, and attention, and the evolving nature of personal identity. This approach offers a more comprehensive and dynamic framework for exploring the intricacies of the mind and its workings. Conclusion. The analysis of mind provides a philosophical and scientific examination of the complexities of human thought, perception, and consciousness. Bertrand Russell challenges traditional notions of the mind, suggesting that consciousness is not a singular entity but a dynamic process shaped by sensory experiences, language, memory, and instinct. By understanding the mind in this way, Russell opens up new ways of thinking about how we perceive, know, and engage with the world. His work remains an influential and thought-provoking exploration of the nature of human cognition and psychology. Thank you for listening. I hope this content is useful to you. If you like this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel to support our team.